The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs Ascending. This isn't just a podcast. This is a call to action for all entrepreneurs who are tired of seeing their businesses and communities suffer while big business continues to grow by the billions. We challenge you to apply the content of our time together to create businesses that your clients can't resist, your employees love to work for, and your communities can depend on. Now is the time for Entrepreneurs Ascending. All right, here we are. Welcome, Judy. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on your show, Matt.
Oh, thanks for being here. I think it's going to be a treat for everybody. So yes, well, welcome to you, the audience, to Entrepreneurs Ascending. And just like we said, this is not just a podcast. I mean, I know it's easy to kind of passively listen, but we really say, like, now the communities are suffering, small businesses really suffering. It's time to put this stuff into action. So we implore you, we beg you, please take what we learned today, what we discussed today, and start putting it into action in your business so you can thrive. And I think with the Great Resignation, I know we've hit upon that quite a few times in our show already, but I don't think that we can hit upon it enough, especially since this is only a weekly show right now. So we're going to dig into some things that are key to this right now and are key to just surviving whatever further changes come in the future, because we saw massive change in 2020, 2021, and we're going to be talking about managing change and how do you create a results-based culture. So we're going to have those two parts like we normally do. We're going to talk about managing change, and then the second part we're going to talk about results-based culture, and they're closely related. So we have a CEO of LifeWorks Systems, and she's here with us today. She has created a powerful, one of the most powerful cultural change, employee empowerment, results-based culture programs that I've seen, and so I'm excited to have her on here today and just be able to share a little bit some nuggets that she's got from her, because she's just a wealth of knowledge in these areas as well. So thanks again, Judy, for being here today.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, so let's jump in. Let's jump right into managing change. So one of the things that I think, there's a quote like, change is hard, right? So why does it really have to be so hard? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's hard because people are suffering. You mentioned that in your opening. You know, people are suffering, and when you're in a suffering or discouraged state, everything feels hard. You know, and you also mentioned the Great Resignation. I think that people are waking up to, am I happy? Am I happy in this job? Am I happy with who I am? Is there more to life than this? And so I like it when it's called the Great Reset, because it's important that people are aligned with their work, because if they're not aligned with their work, it is going to be hard. Everything's hard when we're not aligned. So, but change itself is really hard when it comes to workplace culture, because first of all, there's some pretty major problems that are related to that. One is, what are we supposed to change into? What is a culture model that is healthy? Because culture is kind of a word like parenting. You could have 10 parents in a room and they're all going to answer the question, what is good parenting? Very different from one another. The same is often true for culture. People either do or don't have an idea of what is the evolving, where is the most evolved culture model right now? Some know what that is, some don't know what that is. So one of the things that makes it hard is, what are we supposed to transform from into? And another thing that makes it hard is really just not understanding how to change. So a lot of times people know, maybe they've read books or they've been to, presentations, and they know that they need to change. And what I would say they need to change into is a responsibility-based culture where there's shared power, where there's purpose and values driving everything, where people are really given a lot of exposure and experience with both leading and following, where people understand that freedom has to be paired with responsibility,
Mhm.
which, by the way, our whole society needs to remember that right now, because people want freedom, but they don't want to pair it with responsibility. In some
Yeah.
cases, people want responsibility and they don't pair it with freedom. So those two together are crucial to having,
Mhm.
a whole lot of good things happening. And people
Mhm.
also are ready for a more holistic model. So it's very hard to picture, how do we get all of those new things, and why should we get them? So I know in a little while, we're probably going to be talking about what are the flawed patterns, what are the flawed
Yeah.
belief systems that keep us
Mm.
stuck in kind of old school ways of functioning, that actually make change hard.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a great point. I mean, that right now, I mean, going back to, well, what are we supposed to change into? Like,
mhm,
I think it's hard for people to sometimes get that vision, and then, well, what is my responsibility within that? That I can see that it, especially if you're talking about leading change and
yeah,
trying to help people identify what their responsibility is in that. Do you feel like that's probably sometimes like that?
huge,
Yeah.
huge. Here's here's what most people do not realize in the leadership role is that their
Mhm.
responsibility is to transfer responsibility. Their
Mhm.
responsibility is to develop other leaders. And
Yeah.
so if they don't see that, they're just going to take more and more and more upon themselves. And it's going to feel like they're spending all their time being responsible for everything instead of really transferring that down the line.
Mm.
So a
Mhm.
lot of times what happens is that people, are really learning, how do I transfer responsibility to my people so that they are managing all of their relationships, even with authority figures, even with themselves, even with their peers. How do I help them so that they are managing their own motivation rather than
Mhm.
having me have to induce them with extrinsic motivation? How do we help them to be developing their internal motivation, and how do we clear the barriers for that? And
Okay. Yeah.
things like that are what are causing it to be difficult.
Yeah. So there's extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, right? And the
Mhm.
extrinsic is that external, and the intrinsic is the internal. What are examples of like extrinsic, external? We'll just
It's a
say
hard
external
one.
and internal. It's hard to say on a live podcast. But the extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. What are some good examples of that?
I really appreciate you asking that question, because to me, it's really at the crux of whether we're constricting human potential or expanding human potential.
Hmm.
And a lot of people don't realize, what is it that we're doing that is trying to create motivation from the outside in. And
Hmm.
so some of those are, we call them the four control models. There might be more, but these are the ones we see.
Primary ones.
One is pretty obvious. One is command and control, autocratic ways of treating people. Do it or
Mm.
else. Do it or else you're in trouble. Some kind of spoken or unspoken threat, and a
Hmm.
sense of domination and win lose. So that's one way that we are trying to get people to behave well or be good citizens in our companies.
Mm.
Another way is more surprising to people, and that is using incentives and rewards to induce behavior. It's like that
Hmm.
dangling of carrots. That might
Hmm.
not seem like it would be a harmful thing, but what has been proven in the research is that when you do that, you're actually diminishing the intrinsic motivation within people. They
Mm.
get very focused on what you want from them and what they can get out of it, as opposed to the joy of doing the activity for its own sake. So
Hmm.
that's a big surprise to a lot of people. Another extrinsic motivator is judgment. We all know it from when we were kids. And these are kind of sacred cows, because these are things we do in families, these are things we
Yeah.
do in schools. But you know how a boss might say to someone, I'm really disappointed in you, or I'm
Mm.
really proud of you, even. So
Hmm.
what happens is people start focusing on, I've got to please these authority figures, and that becomes more important than being authentic and in alignment with themselves, and even sometimes challenging things.
Mm.
And then a fourth extrinsic motivator is pampering and spoiling. And this one, we use the psychology of Adler, and he said this is more harmful than the autocratic behaviors, because
Really?
when we enable people by repeatedly telling them things they already know, doing things for them, exempting them from expectations,
Mm.
overcompensating for them, not asking them Socratic questions, not giving them responsibility. All of those things cause a person to think less of themselves and less of their capabilities. So they become more entitled and more afraid of actually, mostly more entitled. Well, I can get somebody else to do this for me. Why should I do it for myself?
Well, that's an interesting one, because I know entitlement is a big thing that's thrown around, right? And I know people always want to claim that younger generations are entitled. I see it in certain ways in every aspect, every generation. But yeah, I mean, I think that can be. I mean, I think that as we see, there's a theory around hegemonic cycles, and that's around societies, and once they get to a certain point, like with Rome, everybody became very pampered and spoiled and entitled, and then shortly thereafter leads to the fall, because nobody's taking responsibility, and things start stagnating. And that's interesting that can happen maybe even within an organization. If
it definitely happens in every setting, because people, and here's what gets difficult about it. You start overcompensating for people and enabling them, and then they become more pathetic, and then you feel even more certain that you're supposed to overcompensate for them or exempt them. It's a vicious cycle until you recognize that it's a vicious cycle and that it is diminishing intrinsic motivation. And you said something kind of interesting, Matt. You said people are always accusing younger people of being entitled, and that you see it across the board in different pockets. And I agree with that. And I would say that anybody that's calling another person entitled or selfish is usually holding on to their own entitlement and their own selfishness. Otherwise, they wouldn't be quick to point it out in somebody else. So a lot of it, that boils down to what we call unresolved psychological contracts. So what that means is we all have this idea of what we're expected to do ourselves and what we are, what we should reasonably expect from others. And so when a leader thinks I'm the one responsible for everything, he or she won't expect that of the other person. So I remember, this is kind of a simple story, but I remember a situation where there was this guy in his workplace, and he looked like the hardest working person in the entire organization. And yet he was causing all these problems. And I went in and met with the senior team and this employee because they didn't know what to do. And he was actually in what we call the goal of inadequacy, which is a mistaken negative behavior that people do when they have been pampered and spoiled a lot of the time. And what happened was I just stopped them all from talking, because what happens when a person's being pampered and spoiled is everybody's working double time instead of that person. And so I was able to say, so you've got everybody scrambling around you, trying to fix everything for you. What are you going to do about it? And he just kind of looked at me like, nobody's been asking me that. and then he did this thing called upping the ante, where he started becoming intimidating back. Well, I work harder than anybody here and blah, blah, blah. And I said, you work very hard and you're still not creating the dynamic for yourself where you can be successful and where the team is being successful. So what will you do about it? And that's the kind of thing that you do when you're not pampering and spoiling, is you call somebody to actually start looking inside and figuring out, how will I fix this? Not how will we fix this? So pampering and spoiling is a really big deal. And we don't even see it as, when we're doing it, we don't even see that we're doing it.
In terms of managing change, I think in another area, so let's say, companies saying, okay, well, we've got to become, more of a sales culture, or we've got to sell more of a certain item, for instance. And so they've got to change certain aspects of the organization. I see, rewards are oftentimes a very big part of that, right? I mean, you've got bonuses and incentives and commissions and stuff like that. So what does it look like in terms of, like, whenever you're trying to change, what can you use instead of a reward model? What?
So a couple of things. First of all, I'm just going to reference Dan Price. I don't know do you know who he is, Matt? Okay,
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
he just pays his employees a really decent wage that is realistic for what it costs to live in the world. You know, like his
Mhm.
lowest pay for his employees is $70,000.
Right. He's the it's a credit card processing company, right? What
Gravity,
Gravity
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 Payments.
Payments? Yes.
So, so one of the things he's doing is he's taking the reasons for wanting all those extra bonuses and everything. He's kind of taking it off the table and saying, let's just pay people so much that's reasonable that they
Mm.
don't have to worry about money and they can
Mm.
focus on customer service. The other thing that I think makes people so codependent on, and I mean that codependent on rewards and incentives and bonuses, is that we are so committed to externally motivating them that we don't realize how to internally motivate them. So I talked about 4 control models that are extrinsic motivators, but I just want to mention that there are 4 intrinsic motivators. And
Okay.
one is helping tie people back to what is the meaningfulness about what you're doing. Like if you're
Mhm.
selling a product or service, so what? What is the so what about it? And why should you be passionate about that? Because
Mhm.
the incentives actually dull that passion and that awareness of the sense of meaningfulness. So, and
Yeah.
I'll just tell you a kind of funny story about this, Matt. There was a
Mhm.
guy named Alfie Kohn that wrote a book called Punished by Rewards. And he
Mm.
tells a story that's a good illustration of how that dulling occurs. It's a story about this old man who lives next to a middle school, and he every day these middle school kids come by his house, and he's up in the second floor looking out over the balcony, and they start heckling him. They start saying, you stinky old goat, you old man, you know, and they're being really rude and disrespectful. And to
Yeah.
their surprise, he says to them, uh, hey, if you guys keep that up, I'll come out and give you all $1. And they're like, what? You know, like they're completely thrown by that. So they do it, and very quickly he comes out and he gives them all $1, and he goes, great job. And he goes, now if you come back tomorrow, I don't have any more dollars, but I have a small roll of quarters. I'll give you all a quarter. So they said, okay. So they left and they went away, and they came back the next day, and they started heckling like crazy. And they even had brought a few friends, and he comes down and he gives them all a quarter. And he's like, great job. And they're kind of baffled, like, what is happening here? And then he says to them, look, I'm out of quarters, but I have a roll of pennies. If you come back tomorrow, I'll give you all a penny. And they're like, a penny? Forget it. And they never bothered him again. Now, what's important to know about that is he had an uncanny knowing that if he made their motivation based on what he was doing, they would lose the love of the heckling that they were doing. You see what I'm saying? So he was able to play on that extrinsic motivation to demotivate them from the original joy and the meaningfulness. Now, it wasn't a good meaning that they were heckling him, but it
Right.
was
Right.
meaningful to them. Like they were getting pleasure out of it. So,
Wow.
so a sense of meaningfulness is crucial to combating extrinsic motivation. So if we spent more time finding out, why do you want to do this work, and how does this fit with your own personal purpose and
Hmm.
values, and what is
Mhm.
the contribution you're making to the world and to our company and to the customers? And there's a disconnect often when you're throwing bonuses and bribery, kind of. I think of it as bribery. And then there's other intrinsic motivators like giving people more choices about how they're going to do things, and delegating bigger amounts of things to them that they want to do, which sounds counterintuitive. Like, why would I give somebody more when I want them to be more internally motivated? Because a lot of times that inspires the internal motivation. So, like,
Hmm.
for example, with my kids, I taught them all how to grocery shop. And back then we wouldn't have gotten reported, you know, because we would drop them off at the grocery store and they would all shop 4 of them together. Nowadays, I'd probably get put in jail for that or something. But what we did was we taught them all how to play a particular role in that process and how to
Hmm.
do it politely and to do it correctly. And, you know, we took a lot of time to train them, and then we cut them loose, and they would get to the checkout, and they would, the checkout people would be like, oh my God, you have hundreds of dollars. Like, where are your parents? And they said, oh, we know how to do this. We stand in a single file when we're walking down the row, so we're not blocking people. And she's got the counter, so we don't go over our budget. And he's got the list, and I got the money in a zippered compartment, you know. And I'm telling you all this because in workplaces, the same thing holds. If you can delegate something to somebody that's a stretch for them, they will be inspired by that because you gave them a choice to be autonomous and even leader in something that they wouldn't have done otherwise. And those are the first two intrinsic motivators. And then there's the
Okay.
motivator of making sure people are competent at what they're doing, and also that they're celebrating where they make progress. Not celebrating by somebody having to give them a bonus, but celebrating it with the community, celebrating it with the company, celebrating it themselves.
Okay. Now what's the difference? Let's just tease that apart. What's the difference between like a reward of celebration and like just celebrating progress?
Well, celebrating progress would be really helping tie back that we did this, or I did this, and why that mattered to the world, to this company,
Mm.
to the community. I remember one time my company won a big, huge contract. It was a like really big, and I had envisioned it, and I had talked about it, and we had all done things to make it happen. And when it happened, I was ready to just jump into it. And my own team said to me, "Can we just stop and celebrate the fact that we just did this?" So if we would have stepped past that, I think we wouldn't have gotten all the juice out of it. So
Yeah.
celebrating is just realizing that we worked hard, we accomplished something, it makes a difference, it's going to make a difference. And if we don't do that, which is different than good boy, good girl, let me give you a bonus. Like that's a different kind of thing than,
Mhm.
hey, we're gonna do a press release on this big contract because of what it's going to do for the community. And we're going to get the
Okay.
community celebrating with us. Like, do you see how different that feels
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
throwing
So
somebody a bonus?
yeah. Yeah. So basically, it's like a reward. Good job, you did this, and I'm going to give you money, as opposed to like let's celebrate the personal growth or the company's growth and their ability to do that, or celebrate it as a win. It could be like just making it public and a press release, or I guess even maybe a party or something like that. But I guess it's not something where it's like you want to hold it over people's head, like, hey, if we get this, we're gonna have a big company party,
Right.
right?
That's really a fine distinction you're making. There's a big
Yeah.
difference between something being like held out as a carrot.
Hmm.
I just want to also clarify, I'm not against a company profit sharing when there's a
Hmm.
win, but it's different than saying I'm going to dangle a carrot in front of you to get you to jump through my hoop. It's
Yeah.
more
Okay.
like, hey, if we
Okay.
win this, we're all going to share in the bounty. And
Okay.
we did that with our kids. If we had a big win in our family, we would give them all a part of it because we wanted them to know we're all in this together and we're all sharing in the good and the bad. And
Okay.
so,
So.
yeah, so it's not that I want people to never have any fun advantages like that. It's just not doing it in a manipulative way.
Hmm. So I guess if we're going to kind of summarize really quickly, the aspect of managing change or leading change. You're saying that first you want to make sure that you identify the personal purpose, but I'm guessing you want to identify like that vision of where you want to go, and then how everybody's personal purpose and their own kind of like personal vision fits into that.
100%. And it's
Okay.
interesting because when people are asked to define their own personal purpose, we get
Mm-hmm.
more blowback on that than anything else that we've ever
Huh.
done. Some people love it, but it's kind of like that quote Marianne Williamson made where it says, our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our
Mm-hmm.
deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. And
Hmm.
it's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. So why would people be afraid of their own power? Because we've been taught to be afraid of it. We haven't been
Yeah.
guided well in it. So we sometimes bumble around and do bad things with it. And then we become afraid of our power and our ability to be potent in the world. So that's why it's
Yeah.
really important that power is celebrated, but it's also guided well.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that to summarize this, purpose is part of the kind of culture, but knowing what kind of culture is really the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing that has to happen before you can even know what's the path, what's the destination for our company in terms of culture.
In terms of culture, right?
Mhm.
But overall, if we're talking about managing change, being able to first kind of set that vision. So it's kind of like what you're saying in, if we're specifically talking about culture, which we're going to get more into here in just a few seconds, really, um, maybe a minute or so. Um, but culture can be a certain vision, of where you want to go, right? And then, but in general, if we're just talking about managing change overall, you have to set that vision and the individual's vision's purpose within that, figure out how you're going to, give them options of what roles they want to play. It sounds like with those choices, and I'm just kind of summarizing really quickly.
Yeah. The only
You
thing,
know,
the only thing I would say, Matt, that I think is super important that a lot of people don't see it this way, or they haven't been taught it this
hmm
way, is vision comes after purpose and values are defined. So,
hmm
so for example, our purpose
mm,
as a company is to create a world where people love their lives. What you're doing in purpose is, what are we causing? What are
hmm
we causing? Not just in a momentary expression of something, but
yeah,
like someday when I'm 95 years old, if I'm in a nursing home or something, something like that, I can still create a world where people love their lives. It's not dependent upon any circumstance or any time in my life or anything. And so
hmm
purpose is super important because it keeps our eyes on the prize of what am I here to cause? And
hmm
then what are the behaviors I'm going to hold, the behaviors and ways of being to help me accomplish that? Then comes vision. Because when you think
mm,
about it, Hitler had values, Hitler had vision. He just didn't
yeah,
have a cause that that we believed in, most of
yeah,
us. So,
right, right.
so yes, vision is important, but vision has to be an expression of that purpose.
Okay, right. So that purpose, then that vision, figuring out where kind of where people want to grow with it, and so their choices within that,
Yes.
helping them to develop their competencies and helping them to stretch in new areas that maybe interest them, and then making sure that you celebrate progress along the way. Is that how we can kind of quickly
Yeah,
summarize it?
those are the
Yeah.
intrinsic motivators. So when you
hmm
dismantle the extrinsic motivators, you don't want to leave people without anything. It's like saying I'm going to
Right.
take away all the food that you're enjoying, and I'm not going to give you any food.
Yeah.
So you're really it's really a replacement. Let's
Mm.
dismantle the extrinsic motivators and let's intentionally create the conditions and conversations that include the development of the intrinsic motivators.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to get into that results based culture. And I think we're going to hit upon that responsibility within that as well. So, Jason, go ahead and run the commercial and then we'll be right back. Have you been suffering from chronic pain, disease, or sleep disorders? Did you know that 75 to 90% of disease is caused by inflammation in the body? The sad truth is, most doctors just treat symptoms rather than finding and fixing root causes of inflammation. If you want to fix your health problems, then finding and fixing the cause of the inflammation is a must. It's time to demand this for your health care and start living life to its fullest again. Book a discovery appointment with the Functional Health Team founder, Dr. Flora, to get your answers ASAP at www.functionalhealthteam.com. Hey, and we're back. All right. And so, results-based culture. Let's talk about how to best achieve a results-based culture. So, workplace culture, I think, is like so poorly handled in most small businesses. I think that it's one of those things where it's kind of like, well, we want it to be kind of organic, or we want it to be kind of free, and whatever it needs to be, or maybe people just don't really even know. But like you said before, like everybody can identify what a culture is, but it's going to be different. Just like you said in the first half, if you ask everybody what parenting is, a bunch of different parents, they're all going to have a bit of a different answer. And I think that you're right with culture. That's a very similar thing. So I guess first of all, how would you define culture?
Well, first of all, for me, it's about what kind of model are you using for culture? What is the
hmm
specific approach that you want your culture to be based on?
hmm
So there were culture models that were focused on somebody dominating from the top. Then
hmm
there's culture models where people have a hierarchy like the Catholic Church or the government or the military. And then there were, every evolution of culture has involved someone that's got power over someone that doesn't.
hmm
So I would say that the most evolved culture model is one in which there's shared power. So
Hmm.
that's the first thing, is to understand. So I would recommend people start looking up what is a teal organizational model.
Hmm.
They can go to our website and look at what is a responsibility-based model. For example, it's very important that everyone in an organization be developed, not just a top-down approach where certain people are the keepers of the knowledge and certain people are the heroes of the company because they're titled and they have all this extra knowledge and power. So that's a really big part of it, is understanding what kind of culture? And I'm really grateful that you're going to allow us to kind of bring up some visuals on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think I want to say something to what you mentioned about results, because in this chart, we're always getting results, right? We're always getting them. We just don't realize that they're not always the results we want, and why those results that we're getting are happening. And how do we shift them so that we get the results over here that we really want, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
Well,
do,
yeah. Whenever I'm working with business owners, and working on them with coaching, I often start with some setting of goals and where they want to be, creating that vision for the future. And one of my pet peeves is that whole just grind harder and you can get your goals if you just work harder. Because really the way that I teach it is that goals are simply a different set of results than what we have now, and what we have now is basically a result of kind of like our current habits and routines and really personal systems and business systems, and that's just giving us what we have now. So if we want different results, we need to change some of those systems, those routines, or ways of operating and doing things.
well, when you're talking about systems and routines and operating ways and behaviors,
Yeah.
those are all what's above the line and what we can see, right?
Hmm.
But what's more
Yeah.
important is what is driving those behaviors. So underneath the surface, there's like 3 different layers that have to do with how do people get the basic needs that they need to be expanded
Yeah.
to their potential? And then how do they believe that they can accomplish that, which is very much based in faulty,
Hmm.
a lot of times faulty, fearful thinking. And
Hmm.
then from that comes certain thoughts and feelings that drive our behavior. So I would say the most important thing when we're looking at results is not only what are the results and what are the behaviors, but what is the mindset?
Hmm.
It's so funny because we always try to hold people back from jumping into tools, because if you don't have the right mindset, you're going to take any great tool and you're going to use it completely terrible. And one of my
Yeah.
clients said to me something recently. I said, I'm going to name my next article after it. It says, "A fool with a tool is still a fool."
Oh man.
And
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
identify with that, because if you don't have the right mindset, isn't that great?
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
fool with a tool is still a fool. So that is the biggest danger. Is we're a society that believes in fast food fixes,
Hmm.
and as quickly as possible. And quicker isn't always better.
Right.
So,
Right.
but you started to kind of allude to we have to work harder. And if you don't
Hmm.
mind, can we bring up the chart and I can kind of go over some of the things
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be
that
great.
relate to that. So, one of the flawed patterns that we have as people is that we have to react to everything as though it's a fire drill, that it's
Hmm.
urgent. And while that sounds reasonable, especially with the speed of change and the complexity we're dealing with, it's a really faulty pattern to believe in, because it's usually coming because of the disproportionate amount of responsibility in the team. And
Mm.
the real question shouldn't be, a belief of we should work harder. The new way of thinking should be, what system, if we put in place, would cause this urgency problem to go away, to be improved, to be fixed? And we don't ask that. We just keep doing more of the same. And so when I mentioned that we're already getting results, the results of believing we have to do more and work harder, and that we have to respond to everything with urgency, is that most of the people in an organization feel rushed. They feel scatterbrained. They feel exhausted. They feel overwhelmed. They feel stressed out. They feel pressured. I mean, that alone you can see is driving some of the great resignation.
Mm.
People are not happy when they feel these experiences. So
Yeah.
part of what's going on here, and I also see this a lot in leaders, is that they have this hero mentality.
Mm.
Jim Collins said in his book, Good to Great, you better beware of the larger than life hero, because
Mm.
what a larger than life hero does is they're holding up everything. And then when they leave, everything falls apart, because you haven't really done a transfer of responsibility to people.
Yeah.
So that's a good, really a good example of that whole sense, that whole concept of we have to just do more, we have to work harder, we have to apply more control methods, which is really the opposite of the true need, which is include more people, include
Mm.
them in coming up with solutions together. You mentioned before the show, Matt, appreciative inquiry. a lot of, I've been listening to a lot of people in the country talking about why people are often drawn to autocracy. It's because it looks like you can get the job done faster. If I just have one ruler, it looks like you can get it done faster. Well, if we don't have a good structural way to solve problems together as people, it will be chaotic. A lot of fear gets injected, and this fear of urgency gets injected, and this whole set of flawed patterns gets injected. But if you use something like appreciative inquiry, which maybe your audience doesn't know what that is, you create a document or a protocol for how people can ask certain questions that uplift the organization, focus the organization, and allow a large contingency of stakeholders to actually be able to really create a positive and focused solution together, which almost seems impossible when you look at our politics and our society today. Did you want the visual down for a minute, Matt?
Yeah, because let's talk about that a little bit more too. So yeah, because that visual covers us up.
Yes.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, so going back to that autocracy, one of the things that I will often see, and what I think is a flawed sales organization, where it's like, you set that goal, and then no matter what it takes, get there. So you'll see performance, like the ups and downs and the backs and forths and everything, and you celebrate the people who get there with whatever it takes. Even if it's like in the last week of the quarter, and you just charge, as opposed to the organizations that, or even the sales leaders that maybe they don't hit the goal, but their line of progress is consistent, and they might hit that goal a little bit later, but they're actually, I think, equipping their team better. Oftentimes we see where they're training better, they're showing the team how to be consistent, and they're supporting them in that, as opposed to that do whatever it takes kind of mentality that I think is actually kind of, so I'll use the toxic
well,
word,
first of
so
all,
toxic in the culture.
where I would disagree with you is sometimes the goal is later, but it isn't always. Like, for example, what we're really talking about here is how do we create the transfer of responsibility to more people, so the work is getting done faster. So in the beginning, the training takes some time to help people to know how to pick up responsibility, and so that we stop enabling them, etc. But once you get that machine going, holy cow, you're way more productive.
Oh yeah, in the long
that's
term.
why there was a study done by Best Buy years ago, and it was they tried something called results-oriented work environment. They created it so that the employees knew the end game, what were the goals, and they could decide however they wanted to do it, how to get there. So they might say, we're only going to work 4 days a week. But what they found is that when they gave that control over to a responsibility-based team that believed in themselves and that the leadership believed in, they accomplished that goal way faster and bigger because they were self-motivated to do it.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't saying that just because, consistency means that you're going to hit it later. So just to be clear, it's not really disagreement so much. I think we're on the same page. I'm just saying maybe it's even later, but I was saying for that juxtaposition where it's like people are always like, well, they hit the goal and that's what was important. That wasn't necessarily what was important in terms of hitting the goal on that day, unless, like, I guess it's a do or die in that organization, but the one that's that roller coaster ride that gets there and hustles at the end or whatever. It's really that hustle culture, that I think that it breeds more so, as opposed to that responsibility.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's why core values should come right after purpose, because if we think that we can get to our goals with any means possible, we're going to step on people to get there. We're going to disrespect people. So core values are, what are the behaviors we're going to maintain that are going to help us achieve this vision, which goes beneath it? How are we going to make sure we're doing it in a way that is respectful to people?
Yeah.
And that's often a step people would rather not be bothered with, right?
Yeah.
So that's where on the chart, you don't have to necessarily pull it back up. But the second thing in the set of flawed patterns is called orchestration. When one person or a small contingency of leaders at the top are orchestrating everything, they're often doing it without consideration of people at all the different levels.
Yeah.
And so the belief is some are supposed to set everything up and everybody else is supposed to just do what they're told because the people at the top know best.
Mm.
And some of that is because we haven't seen how to create a large amount of stakeholders having a fruitful conversation and doing it quickly.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what is possible, but it's not been visible to people that it's possible to do that.
Hmm. Yeah. So that's interesting. Like if people don't understand if people don't understand how to have a conversation with multiple stakeholders, right? Then what would you say to those folks? Like, how would you describe the functioning of a conversation where it's
So
efficient and everybody seems to kind of get their say and have input?
the first thing I would say is most people they don't believe something till they see it. So who would
Okay.
have guessed 30 years ago that we'd all be walking around with cell phone computers basically on us?
Hmm.
Who would have believed that we could all have our own personal computers or our own, all
Yeah.
kinds of things, our own GPSs and everything? So part of it is people don't believe that we can be effective and efficient in a collective because they
Hmm.
haven't been taught how to be. And
Hmm.
so they haven't even seen a lot of evidence of it. So that's why it's so easy to fall back on it's my job to orchestrate everything. It's my job to impose controls on everything instead of including people and developing people. So that's part of it is just believing that it can happen and then looking for what is the system that makes it happen.
Hmm.
Like one of the articles I wrote recently was called "Rip Out All the Roots," because if we ripped out all of the core, beliefs that we're operating out of that are not helpful, we would be able to create practices where everybody works things together. And the reason I wrote that article was it was after George Floyd was killed, and one of my own consultants said, "You need to go in and fix the police departments." And I said, "We don't do it that way. We work with the entire community." So if we were going to try to fix problems with brutality and abuse of power, we would involve the stakeholders of, the churches in the area, the
Yeah.
politicians in the area, the advocacy groups in the area, anybody that was interested, in addition to the police departments.
Hmm.
Because the problem is not who's to blame. The problem is what is going on in the system that this problem is even occurring. And
Yeah.
that's a very different kind of approach. I don't know if I'm off of what you're asking, Matt.
Well, so like how would you describe the functioning of a more responsibility based type well, I'm sorry, not responsibility based. How would you describe the function of or how maybe the agenda of the stakeholder conversation versus, the authoritarian person at the top, we're going to get this done fast type conversation?
Well, it is a pretty big system change to get there because right
Okay.
now the way
All
it's
right.
showing up is why we have an 80-20 rule where 20% of the people are doing the majority of the work and everybody else is kind of expected to be sort of mindless droids.
Yeah.
That's often happening. So part of it is people buying into the idea that it's possible and seeing why and how it's possible. In
Hmm.
our world, the answer to that is very specific. It's we have an implementation of how to do that. And it's
Hmm.
really interesting because like right now, I'm doing all these things to improve my health. But like if you sign up for a gym and you don't go to the gym, it's not your
Yeah.
body's not going to get any different. If you go to the gym and then you go eat hot fudge sundaes all the time, it's not going to be different. So there's a
Hmm.
very multidisciplined approach for shifting a company from a conventional power over power under dynamic to one
Hmm.
in which everyone is personally responsible. There's time that needs to be invested in that shift. A
Yeah.
lot of
Okay.
a lot of leaders don't even know they need to shift or how they need to shift.
So what you're saying is, you might not be able to just jump into that kind of conversation. Like, so if we're talking about like this is about the show is about empowering the entrepreneur to take action with this. So there, but you're not going to necessarily go from that leader led directive type meeting conversation to full stakeholder, everybody participates conversation. It's not going to just be like you're going to walk in there and just make it work tomorrow. You're saying that there has to be some foundational stuff that needs to be put into place
Yeah,
around these
not
beliefs.
only foundational stuff put in place, but foundational stuff that's already there dismantled. And
Okay.
that's both mindset and practice. So,
Mhm.
so just like me giving the example of my kids going to the grocery store, that took training. It was part of a much larger system change that we made as parents. In
Okay.
fact, in the very beginning, when I was learning it, I learned alternatives to using punishment and bribery and all those things. And I remember my instructor, I'll never forget this. She said, keep spanking your kids until you realize you have an alternative and that you believe in it. And that gave me a lot of peace, because in a change process, we often go from being completely unaware of what we don't know what we don't know. We don't know that
Okay.
there's an alternative way. So we haven't been given the information. And I would say this applies to leaders in a culture transformation. They don't know what they don't know. And
Yeah.
then they move to knowing what they know. Like, I started learning how to do alternatives to punishment, but I still wasn't secure enough, confident enough, and skilled in my own mind enough to choose the new behavior. So I was consciously unhelpful, consciously incompetent.
Hmm.
And that's a very necessary stage. That's why when a leader is transforming their organization, or the whole company is transforming it, the watchwords need to be compassion and curiosity. Because if you beat yourself up every time you see something that you just learned and you're not yet doing it, you're not going to get further. So really being able to understand that the change process involves a period of time during every phase, where sometimes we're going to get stuck in, I know better, but I still haven't committed to doing better. And that's okay. That's just a necessary part of building our convictions and our commitment. And then we finally get into the point where our changed behavior becomes conscious and deliberate. But it's not, it's kind of like, I always say, it's like driving a stick shift. You can't drink a soda or fiddle with the radio or be on your phone or anything when you first learn. Because if you aren't super aware of and super conscious of, you're probably going to strip a gear or roll backwards or whatever. So eventually, people that drive stick shifts, they get to the point where they're doing all those things, talking on the phone and drinking a soda and all that, and they make it home without even realizing that they don't even know now what they now know.
Yeah.
So that's a really big part of it. Is yes, it takes effort, and it's going to, in that sense, the goals maybe slow down sometimes a little bit, because you're in the change process, but they slow down so that they can speed up.
Okay. So now we've only got a couple minutes left. Let's quickly summarize. Okay, what are the steps that somebody needs to go through, like in 30 seconds or less, maybe a minute? What are the steps that somebody needs to go through to start creating a more responsibility-based culture? You said first is like mindset.
First is mindset. In our model, just to give you an answer on that, we believe in using something called flip training, which isn't just about training. How do you introduce a way of a change process in which it's going to be something that people own and they apply, and it becomes the new norm? That's what's important about implementation. A lot of organizations are used to one and dones. That, let's go to a workshop, let's spend a retreat weekend or something. None of that is going to work. What you need is an immersion process. And that immersion involves assessing and reassessing, and individual training and group review, and people taking turns leading groups, and people being mentored every single month on these, how these mindsets and these behavioral changes. How do I keep connecting the dots between how those apply in my life? And then having the organization integrate the mindsets and the tools so that they become part of the operations of the business. Now, I just said a big mouthful, but if you don't do it that way, you're going to keep laying over the new mindset with, an old mindset, and then you're not going to be you're going to be a fool with a tool, or a fool with tools.
Right. And we said that we want to try to avoid that. All right. Well, we've got like 30 seconds real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you, how does somebody get more information or get in contact with you, Judy?
Well, first of all, I hope people that are listening will visit our website, www.lifeworksystems. So life work is singular, systems is plural.com. And also, I'm happy for people to reach out and email me at judy@lifeworksystems.com. I'm happy for people to call me. I don't necessarily need to put my number out there, but it's on our website. It's on my LinkedIn profile. I would love to be able to send information to people because I think a lot of listeners are probably knowing they need to do something different, but they don't know how to start or how to implement or even what to consider.
Yep.
And I also would recommend that people go on our website and take our survey that's on the homepage, because it really starts to help them understand what they don't know about their own culture practices and their own culture score.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Judy. And we appreciate you having you on the show. We'll have to do this again. Definitely dig in deeper these things. And thank you for watching. Now it's time to start learning more about this. I guess keep spanking your children until you find out a better way that you believe in. Wait, maybe I shouldn't be condoning spanking your children, but you know what I mean. All right. Take care. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Matt. Have a good one.
Thank you for being with us today. But now is the time to put what we talked about into practice. Remember, your family, employees, and community are depending on you to rise up and win. The great news is you're not alone. You're part of a resurgence of entrepreneurs who are ready to take their business, life, and impact to the next level, and we're going to do it together. This show is powered by Time for Success, where we help business owners every day who want more freedom and wealth while building a legacy of positive impact. Please follow Time for Success on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube for more helpful strategies and tools for creating the business and life of your dreams.